Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. This was something that happened when I was around 4 or 5 years old. Of course, I know I was really young, so I didn't have all the details. So this was also put together with the help from my dad, as it involved the two of us. I remembered parts of this from my perspective, but I'll also include what my dad saw and experienced, so I apologize if it does jump around some. This was sometime in the early 90s. My family, which was my mom, my dad, my baby sister, and I, lived near the border of Oklahoma and Texas. My dad had gotten a phone call about his mom falling ill, and they were afraid that she wouldn't make it much longer, so he wanted to go be with her in Mexico. Both of my parents were working full-time jobs, so they were kind of stuck. My mom wouldn't be able to watch both of us while working, but they also couldn't afford to have us all go, so they decided that my dad would take me with him since I was older, and my mom would stay at home with my sister since she was a newborn anyways and could bring her with her to work. So my mom made us some food for the road, and after packing a bag for both of us and bringing my favorite toys, we headed out late one night. That way, we could get through a lot of driving while I slept, plus it was a little cooler. It was the middle of summer, and it was unbearably hot. The AC was barely working, and we couldn't have it on at all times. Otherwise, the car would start running funny. We also had a very old car that could fall apart at any time, so driving at night was almost preferable. Unfortunately, we started having troubles with the car in the middle of the drive. I remember seeing a lot of white smoke, and my dad said it was sputtering. And thank God that we were not on a deserted and empty part of the highway. With his hazards on, he was able to slowly take an exit, got past and stared by multiple cars, and then rolled into the parking lot of a rundown truck stop. I do remember being my young self, asking some form of, "Are we there yet?" To which my dad told me that we had to fix the car. Instead of pulling into a parking spot, he pulled up to the curb and close to the building. There was a picnic table in the grass nearby that had an umbrella over it. My dad pulled me out of the car and had me sitting on the table, and he gave me a few of my toys and a juice box. He told me to stay there no matter what while he looked at the car. As mentioned, it was very hot that day, and when we talked about this when I was older, he told me that he didn't want to leave me in the car and risk me overheating, so he thought that the next best thing would be to sit me there in the shade. I was still pretty close to him, where all he had to do was to turn his head to the left, and then he would see me and would probably hear me if I tried talking to him. The problem, however, wouldn't be with me overheating, but himself. He said that he was already feeling ill and felt like his blood pressure was high, but he chalked it up to just being stressed out and hot. He said after finding out with what was wrong with it, he would sit with me to relax for a bit before we got back on the road. But he wouldn't get that far. He popped the hood, got in the driver's seat to get something, and then passed out. I didn't know anything was happening, so I just sat on the bench as I was told and shared my juice with me and my stuffed animal that I had. At one point, I saw a man walking out the store, and I remember thinking that he reminded me of my uncle. My Uncle Louis was a truck driver, and he always had on a pair of overalls. He also had a cowboy hat and sunglasses. This man was dressed the same way, so when he looked at me and smiled, I smiled and I waved back. I watched him as he walked along the side of the building, seeming to be looking around, and then he did a sharp turn and headed back in my direction. He then stood right across from me and said hello. I said hi back, and I asked him if he knew Uncle Louie. He laughed, and then said he thought he did, and asked who I was with. I told him my dad, and I pointed to our car. The guy then said something like, "Oh, it looks like your daddy could use some help. How about we surprise him with some ice cream? It's really hot out here." Again, I was very young. I knew that it was hot because my dress was sticking to me and starting to make me feel uncomfortable. But I could also tell that something was wrong with my dad by the way he was acting and how much he was sweating. This guy also seemed very nice, and because he did appear to be like my uncle, I thought that it would be okay. I also thought that this was supposed to help my dad, either with a car or to cool off or maybe just to make him happy, and that's what I wanted. I wanted to help him, so I agreed to go with him. I stood up, I went to walk around the other side of the bench, and I grabbed the man's hand. As we started walking, and that was about the same time that my dad woke up. He said that when he came to, his immediate thought was me. He didn't know how long he had been out, so he jumped out of the car and saw me walking away with this unknown man. That's when he started running towards us, but he said that his legs felt like concrete, so his next option was to yell for me. The only thing he managed to get out was, "Maria, peligro!" which was basically danger in Spanish. He was bilingual, and I was starting to learn Spanish with my English, but I didn't know it very well. But one of the things that I was taught was stranger danger. However, we would later learn this, but my dad was amid a heat stroke, so with being very weak, all he could muster was danger. After shouting this, he then stumbled forward, falling to the ground, hitting his head on the curb. Hearing the fear in my father's usually booming voice really startled me, and when I saw him fall, I immediately screamed and the guy I was walking with took off. My dad and I both remember the guy being white, but of course, I didn't know if he knew Spanish and what he just said, or if it was just the fact that my dad caught him, so he took off. I ran to my dad, who was now on the ground, and all I knew to do was to scream and cry and shaking him to get him to wake up. A lady in the truck stop heard all of this and then ran out to try and help. And after that, it all kind of ran together. I remember a few other people helping by, putting cold rags on my dad. I remember the ambulance coming, and then my dad waking up. They had to calm him down as he was panicking because he couldn't see me initially. The lady was sitting on the bench with me, trying to keep me calm and out of the EMT's way. When I called out for him though, and he knew that I was okay, he then started to calm down too. I know the EMTs wanted him to go to the hospital to see if he had a concussion, but he refused. After he cooled down, he said that he was feeling much better and that he needed to fix his car so we could all get back on the road. The lady that was with me had my dad pull his car into the truck garage to take a look at it while he rested inside the AC. My dad said the issue had something to do with the radiator, and they only asked him to pay for the part which they had and that they wouldn't charge for the labor. I remember the lady being very kind. She asked me questions about myself and my family while the EMTs were there. She gave me a push pop and some water and let me keep the little pool stuffed animal toy thing. It was like the water footballs that you toss around in a pool, but it was a rabbit, I think. She had soaked it in cold water for me to help keep me cool too. So, to wrap things up, the guy unfortunately fled. He was driving a big truck, so they had his license plate number and knew the business thanks to the giant logo on the trailer. We used this to contact the company and the police to report it, but my dad said that he never heard anything back. So we assume that they either never found or caught the guy, or unfortunately, they didn't take it seriously. We did make it to Mexico with a day to spare before his mom passed. It was one hell of a trip for us, and I became even closer to my dad after that. It's like we really became partners, always watching out for each other. Growing up, I knew I was adopted. My parents were always very open about it with me and gave me as much information as they knew or could when I asked questions. They have and always will be my parents to me. But as I got older, I was curious about my biological parents. I wanted to know more about them, who they were and what they looked like. And not to mention, I thought that it was important to know about any possible genetic and health concerns. So with the information I was given by my parents and the adoption place that they went through, I was able to learn more about my mother as she consented to be contacted by me if I wanted to. I spoke to my biological mother on the phone, and to my surprise, she was happy to hear from me, and the conversation just felt natural. Because of how well this went, I made plans to go and meet her in person. However, she lived in Utah, and my family and I lived in Wyoming, so I made a solo road trip out of it. My parents were even happy for me and encouraged it. I was in a great mindset at that time, and things were going well, and I felt like I was both getting closure and filling holes in my life. It was a great day to be on the road. The weather was perfect, there was minimal traffic, and I was just enjoying the drive while also playing out different scenarios and making plans with my biological mother. However, as the sun was beginning to set, I started to become tired, but I guess because I was too excited, I didn't want to sleep yet. So instead, I stopped to get a bite to eat, hoping that it might give me some energy to keep going. It worked for a few hours, but ultimately, I wasn't going to be able to avoid it. I had taken long trips like this before on my own, and I didn't need much, so I typically slept in my car rather than getting a hotel room. I took the next exit and I pulled into the parking lot of a store that was 24 hours. I felt those were at least safer as there were always someone there, and in case that I needed a restroom, I had one available. I actually did go in the store. I think it was like a convenience store, but not a gas station as there were no pumps there. I grabbed something to drink, used the restroom, and I started heading back to my car. As I was walking there, I started hearing someone shouting from behind me. It was as if they were trying to get someone's attention, so it didn't sound alarming, scary, or angry. But since it was shouting nonetheless, I turned around to see what was happening. I saw a normal guy, maybe in his 40s. His hair was long and stringy, and he also had a pretty long beard. He was wearing jeans and a denim jacket with a dark-colored shirt under it. And to my surprise, he was waving me down. I stopped to hear him out as he was caught up to me, and he asked if I had a cigarette. I apologized and I told him that I didn't smoke, and he seemed like he was trying to figure out something else to say or ask. He then looked at my hand as I was carrying my bottle of tea and asked if I had anything else to drink. The guy seemed completely normal and maybe just a little down on his luck or something. Or hell, maybe he was just a mooch and trying to get anything he could for free. Either way, he wasn't being aggressive or annoying, so I pulled out the change that I got from my purchase. I paid with a 10, so I had like 5 left and some ones that I just shoved in my pocket, and I just gave it to the man. He smiled and seemed genuinely thankful for it, making a comment how he would be able to get smokes and also a drink with it. I just kind of smiled back and said something like, "Oh, no problem, man. Enjoy your night." He waved goodbye and then headed back towards the store. I then got in my car. I had parked close to the front, and then I drove it to the back of the lot, parked, and then settled in to sleep for the night. I drifted off to sleep pretty quickly, but then I remember hearing what sounded like scratching. I was still in half of a sleep state and thought that it was part of my dream. You know that feeling, kind of like when you hear your alarm in your dream. But then, when the sound became faster and a bit louder, it finally jolted me awake and I looked around to find the source of the sound. It didn't take me long to figure out, because when I looked over the passenger door, I saw the same guy from earlier messing with my door handle. I turned on my cab light and I cracked the window on my side, the driver's side, and I asked him what the hell he was doing. The guy didn't even jump or look away from the handle when I did this, so I knocked on the passenger window to get his attention. He finally looked up at me, and with a deadpan look on his face, he asked if I would let him in so we could talk. However, something seemed off. The monotone way that he said it, and how he was so persistent on trying the door put me on the edge. So I didn't unlock the door or anything, but I asked what he wanted to talk about. He would refuse to answer. He just kept saying in the same robotic voice, "I just want to talk about things. Please open the door." Again, that uneasy feeling was still there, and even though I gave this guy some money, there was still no way that I was going to let this stranger in my car in a small enclosed area. I told him that I couldn't and that I needed to sleep, but he just shouted no at me and continued trying the handle, but getting more aggressive with it. After this going on for a few minutes, trying to figure out what I could do to get him to leave, I decided that it was best to just leave. I put my keys in the glove box, and as I went to grab them, this guy's demeanor changed. He began kicking the door and slamming into the window. I could see it slightly bend and began to worry that he would actually manage to break it. With my hands now shaking, I tried to put the key in the ignition and start the car. I managed to get it started and burned out before he could break the window at least. But I had to go around a median to leave, which unfortunately gave this guy enough time to pick up a rock, chuck it at my car, and unfortunately caused my rear view window to crack. I got out of that parking lot and saw the guy in my mirror chasing me for a second until I reached the intersection. I had only been asleep for about 2 hours, but with my heart now racing, I was fully awake and I decided not to stop driving. I didn't stop until the sun came up, to which I finally took a break at a McDonald's. I called my parents from there and I told them what happened, but tried keeping it lighthearted as to not worry my mother. And after talking to them and also a quick meal, I was feeling more grounded and I got back on the road to finish my drive. I arrived at my biological mother's home after that with no other incidents, but I also didn't stop again, other than for the normal food or restroom break. Obviously, I don't know what that guy's intentions were, but because of that feeling that wouldn't go away, I can't help but feel that it wasn't going to be to ask for more money or any innocent conversation. The fact that his demeanor changed within a second terrified me even more. So I was just glad that I got out of there before he was able to get in, and even more thankful that I woke up to the initial sounds. This happened to me and my boyfriend when we went on a road trip a few years ago. It wasn't our first one, nor the last, so we were pretty accustomed to the road. We knew our limits when it came to how long we could drive without stopping, when we needed to sleep and things like that. We both typically stayed awake to keep each other company, but one of us would occasionally take a nap if we knew that we were going to be switching out and driving through the night. That's what takes us to this incident that I wanted to share. We were taking a road trip towards the northeast to see one of our favorite bands, and it was only about a 20-hour drive. We wanted to do it in one go, giving us more time and money to spend at our destination. So we made arrangements and planned out how long we would both drive as to not have one person drained or driving more than the other. I felt like this was something that a lot of people don't think about, which can lead to a lot of accidents. So make sure to plan this out to some extent before getting to the road. The drive started fine, and I agreed to drive first, as my boyfriend, Wyatt, has better eyesight, and I also don't want to drive at night. We stopped as the sun was going down to fuel up and grab something quick to eat. And then, we started back on our path, knowing that we still had a bit of a drive ahead of us. However, I was starting to feel a bit drowsy, and after letting Wyatt know, he suggested that I try sleeping some to prepare in case that we needed to switch out. I asked him if he was sure, and he said that he was, affirming that he did not feel tired in the slightest. So, I got comfortable in my seat, and I started drifting off. It started as light dozing, where I could still hear the music playing, but your body feels heavy, and you know that you're starting to fall asleep. And soon after, I was pretty clean out as I remember that I couldn't hear the music anymore. I don't recall the details of it now, but I know I was sleeping heavy enough that I was daydreaming at the time because I remember thinking that it was weird. However, I was abruptly awoken by the worst scream that I have ever heard coming from Wyatt. I just remember it sounded like he was terrified, and when I opened my eyes, all I saw was a bright light that pretty much swallowed us. It was dead of night, yet all I could see was the light. That's when Wyatt hit the brakes and swerved the car over towards the side of the road. However, this ended up being a dream within a dream, I guess. Because when I woke up screaming, startling Wyatt enough to pull over to try and calm me, I remember tears streaming down my face and asking him what happened and what that was. But he looked so confused and asked me what I was talking about. After I finally stopped talking and listened to him, I realized that everything was fine. He said that nothing had happened on the road. In fact, there hadn't even been any cars in sight, and I woke up screaming, causing him to jump. So, I explained to him what I had seen or dreamt, I guess, and he comforted me again and said that we were okay. Everything felt so real, down to even hearing music playing and the low humming sound of the tires on the road. We sat there on the shoulder with our hazards on, just giving ourselves a moment to compose ourselves. We talked just to calm our nerves before getting back on the road. Wyatt then made some kind of joke and then asked me to grab a snack from our bag in the back. I reached back to grab it, and as I was turning back around and putting my seatbelt back on, we started to see some lights in the distance coming from the opposite direction. It was one of those quick glances for me at first, and I went back to opening our bag of chips, when we then started to hear the blaring sound of a semi-horn. Being on such an empty and dark road, it was odd to hear it, which caused us to look up again. We watched as we heard the horn getting louder and saw the lights getting closer and brighter. We watched as it got closer, and we were able to make out another light coming from the side of the truck. We watched as it got close enough to finally make out what the light was. It was actually sparks from where a tire should be. The truck had its cabin light and brights on and was practically laying on the horn. And we watched it pass us, horrified, as this huge semi slowly drifted through to the other lanes of traffic and was grinding the cement barrier on our side. We turned around and watched this until the light was barely visible and we could no longer hear the horn. I didn't know what to say or what to do. If we were still on the road, what would have happened to us? In my dream, it has to be related, right? I woke up to Wyatt's scream, but also a bright light, like what you would expect if an 18-wheeler was coming right at you, right? I think Wyatt was trying to keep me calm, or maybe himself, and then said, "Well, that was pretty scary." I nodded in agreement, but we just continued to sit there. After a few minutes, he pulled out his phone and then called 911 and reported what we just saw while I sat there silently. After the call ended, we got back on the road and then drove in silence, practically tensing up at every car that we saw that came from the opposite side. I think the incident did a number on both of us because we ended up stopping at some grocery store and then slept there overnight. The next morning, I still felt a little shaken, but I just tried to move on, thinking that we just got lucky. We continued being vigilant on the road, and then we enjoyed our vacation. The rest of the trip did not have anything similar happen, and Wyatt seemed like he got past it. But I still had this lingering in my head as to what all of that was about. I know deja vu. I've experienced that many times before, but this dream felt so real, like it happened but we just reset or something. Wyatt and I have since gone our separate ways, but we're still friends. However, we never talked about this since that time of that road trip, and when I had tried to bring it up before, he never wanted to talk about it either. Other than my sister and a friend, I haven't really talked to anyone about this because it's still something that disturbs me. But I finally felt the urge to share it to see if anyone else had experienced something similar. That way, at least, I would know that I am not alone. Hey there. I've been listening to your channel for a few months now, and hearing some of your older stories reminded me of an event that happened to me and a friend last year. This happened when me and my friend Morgan took a road trip to Las Vegas. It wasn't the first time that we had done this, and we've also learned a few things since our first trip, so by now, I felt that we were a bit more prepared. I took my car to the shop to make sure that everything was working as it should be. And then, we made a well-prepped cooler of healthy snacks and drinks, as well as a few energy drinks. We packed our bags and probably overpacked, but we made sure that we had everything, as well as some extras. I even refilled my emergency kit that I kept in my trunk. It had my normal first aid stuff, as well as a towel and a blanket, things like that. I had a few people make fun of me for my kit, including my boyfriend, saying that I was just overdoing it. And I always said that I would rather have it and never need it than, well, you know. I was living with Morgan and her sister at that time, which made it even more convenient for us, meaning that we're able to leave when we wanted without wasting more time meeting up. We stopped to have a light breakfast and also some coffee, and then we got on the road. The drive for the most part was very uneventful. I mean, it was a great drive. We did it in the early spring, so it wasn't cold and not too hot. It was honestly perfect. We just didn't have anything crazy or hectic happen or get in our way. We had several planned stops on the way, including a national park and museum, both of which were fantastic. I got to make my own geode, and it had a beautiful amethyst in it. I believe that we had just hit the Nevada border, and so we decided to stop at a hotel for the night. We still probably had about a day's worth of driving, so we wanted a place that we could stay and freshen up. And the hotel was your average hotel. We took our much needed showers, enjoyed the included breakfast the next morning, and then just headed back to our car to get out of there. Well, this is where things got pretty chaotic. We probably had only been on the road for about an hour, just talking or whatever on a pretty open highway. There weren't many cars or whatsoever on the road, which was pretty nice. But then, I had a Jeep with dark tinted windows come up behind me. They weren't riding too close or anything, but it was just something that I took notice of. However, they did start getting closer, and again, I made a mental note of it. However, it wasn't consistent. They would get close and then let off, and then this would repeat. That's when I mentioned it to Morgan, because I thought that if they were in such a rush, why not just go around? It wasn't a single lane or anything, so they very well could have. Morgan said something about them either just being an ass or trying to be intimidating, and said not to worry about it too much at that time. However, it kept happening, and they were pushing it with how close they were getting, which made me lose my train of thought while we were talking. I pointed it out again to Morgan, and she turned back to look at it. We both agreed that it was getting weird and said that we should slow down. I was using cruise control, so I wasn't going under and was probably actually going slightly over. We were hoping that they would grow impatient and then finally just pass us. And it looked like that was finally happening when the Jeep went around. It was then in the lane next to me. They were parallel to me, and because of what they were doing, we both looked over at them. The side windows were also dark, so we didn't see the driver until they rolled down their window. What we saw was some normal-looking guy, completely bald head, wearing some kind of plain t-shirt and sunglasses. Yet, I could tell by the wrinkles on his forehead and the clenched jaw that he looked furious, and I had no idea why. I kind of looked at him with a, "Can I help you?" kind of look, because I didn't know what his problem was. As I mentioned, it's not like I was driving erratically or stopping him from going around. The guy then motioned for me to pull over, and I immediately shook my head no. That only seemed to enrage him more as he began yelling at me to pull over. I think I speak for the both of us when I say that we were starting to grow a bit uneasy. There weren't many cars around at that exact moment. We were the only ones. The guy then slowed down and got back behind us, so Morgan immediately pulled out her phone and started recording it. I just continued driving, hoping to see an exit soon. I was trying to change the GPS to the next exit or a gas station or anything that would put us around more people, when we felt the car jolt forward a bit. This guy had now hit my car. Morgan started screaming, and we were both asking what the hell this guy was trying to do. And then he rammed us again. I'm trying to keep us on the road while having a panic attack when Morgan said that she was going to call the cops and then turned back around in her seat. She was trying to explain to the dispatcher what was happening, and we were struggling to give our location. I knew the name of the highway, but I kept missing the mile markers due to being so obviously distracted. I was able to find it thanks to my GPS and the operator instructing Morgan to check it. As they were talking to us about what to do, the guy again went to the lane next to us, window down, and shouted something that I couldn't make out. I guess he wasn't satisfied because he then hit my car from the side, which made me swerve, and I had to try and correct it so I didn't run off the road. Morgan again was screaming to the operator what was happening when he hit us one more time, closer to the back, which caused a very hard fishtail to start. And yes, I know how to correct a car when that happens, before someone says anything, but my efforts were in vain because the guy again managed to hit me, causing us to careen into the oncoming exit barrels, the exit that we were going to try to take. We slammed into on the passenger side. Both of us were still conscious, but hurt, so we were completely aware that this guy had driven past, but backed up to look at us with a creepy smile, and then took off again. That was the last time we saw him. We sat there, sobbing, terrified that this guy might come back, and I was worried about how damaged my car was. We weren't even in the same state that we lived in. How would we get home if it was totaled? It wasn't long before another car approached us and stopped to see if we were okay. It was an older guy, like a lot older, so we weren't exactly afraid of him. He just looked like a normal Good Samaritan. I started explaining what happened while also trying to help Morgan find her phone that, of course, went flying out of her hand. And once we found it, the operator was still on the phone, which, by the way, after hearing the screams and crash, I applaud them for still being there for us. So, we told them what happened, and they explained that the officers were almost there. I was able to get out of my door, and Morgan had to climb over to my side to get out. The old man stayed with us until the police arrived, and we gave him a hug, thanking him for trying to keep us calm and offering his coffee to us. We gave the police as much information as we could about the man and also the vehicle and how this came out of nowhere. They tried to play it as road rage taken too far, but if so, it was only on one side. Like I said, I never even saw the Jeep prior to him tailgating me. I didn't recognize the man, nor did Morgan. We tried explaining this to the police, but whether or not they believed us, they did agree that it was taken way too far. We had my car towed to the nearest auto shop, and the cops gave us a ride there for us to wait. Sadly, the whole right side was smashed in and unable to open the front passenger door, but just about everything under the hood was still fine. They replaced the wheel on the passenger side since it was bent or something, and tried to pull out some of the dents on that same side, but the door was still difficult to open. Overall, we were pretty shaken up, and the fact that we were so close to our destination, we thought that it would be a waste to turn back. Once we had calmed down and the car was done, we took it slow, driving on some side roads until we were ready to get back on the highway. I was still super nervous about it, worried that that guy may have never exited or has just been in the same area. But thankfully, we never had any more incidents. That's not to say that I didn't have a slight mental freakout anytime I saw a Jeep or someone following a little too close. We gave the police our information in case that they ever saw the Jeep or the guy, but as of me writing this, neither of us have heard from them. And this experience was terrifying for both of us, but it also left us confused. Again, I get road rage. I have shamefully flipped some people the bird for cutting me off, but I would never try to risk their life. On top of this, I have no idea what the hell I could have done to set this guy off. We still go on road trips, Morgan and I together and with the others, but I don't think that I would ever forget the feeling that I had that day, or the feeling like I was being targeted, or even the feeling that someone wanted me dead, or at least severely injured. So, if you are on the road, just take some precautions. Make sure people know where you are and how to read mile markers, and always wear your seatbelt. When my parents got a divorce, me and my two brothers had to deal with a custody trade off. During the summers, we'd go to my dad and stepmom's place for 1 to 2 weeks and then go back to my mom's. One summer, my dad and stepmom would be driving to the middle of nowhere, Iowa, to see her family, and you guessed it, that was the week at their place. I didn't care much to be around her side of the family, but I did enjoy the long car rides. They had a kid together, so it would be the four of us in their giant van that they had, which was also nice. I got to sit in the middle seat, meaning that I got a spot to myself. My stepsister is in the next seat to me, and my two little brothers in the back. This was before we had smartphones though, so all I had to keep me sane was my knockoff MP3 player and my drawing pad and a book that I was reading. So, off we were on this road trip for around 12 hours or so. Maybe it was longer, but being a kid, I know it felt like forever. We also had to stop overnight once. Once it started getting dark out, everyone was starting to fall asleep. I remember listening to my music when my dad said something to me. We were the only ones awake at that time. He said that he needed to stop to use the restroom and try to stay awake and ask if I needed to go, because it would probably be the last stop for the night. I told him no, so I just sat in the car and waited. After a few, he came back and we headed out for what I assume was a few more hours of driving. Not long after we left the gas station though, I ended up falling asleep. When I woke up, it was still pitch dark and the car was off and everyone else was fast asleep. I got up and I looked at the time on my dad's phone to see if anyone would be up soon. But it was only like 2 or 3 in the morning, so I assumed that we would still have a few hours before we were moving again. I laid back in my seat for a bit trying to fall back asleep, with no luck. My dad snores, like a lot, so I more so sat looking up at the roof, waiting to eventually pass out. But after a few minutes of that not working, I decided to look around to see if I could see anything. From the front, I couldn't see much, but a long concrete parking lot, and to the left, I could see the highway which was giving off the most light. And from my side, there appeared to be a small concrete building with one street lamp above it on the opposite side. It appeared that we were at the back of the building, as there weren't any doors on the side that I could see. At that time, I didn't know where we were or what I was looking at, and at the end of the parking lot on the side that I was on, there were some trees after it, like the type you see lining a highway. They were tall, bunched together, and you can barely be able to see past them. I decided that while I couldn't see much, I would try drawing the trees in hopes that that would make me tired. As I started drawing them, I looked back over to get a good reference when I noticed 2 particular shorter trees that looked dead. I started staring a little harder to try and focus and get a better idea of what I was looking at. At this point, I had my head to the window, hands cupped around them, staring out at these trees. That's when I finally realized that I wasn't looking at trees. The 2 shorter ones appeared to be legs. They weren't swaying and bending even slightly with the wind. They stood perfectly still until I saw them all move like they were going to walk away or readjust how they were standing. I couldn't see much of the head though, as it led right up to the dark parts of the trees. I thought, okay, so this is like a really big deer or something. So I continued to watch it for a bit, and then I tried to add the deer to my picture. When I looked back up, I didn't see it at first, thinking that it just moved. I then started looking around for it. and it didn't take long to find it as I saw something small fall from a tree that the creature was standing near. And then I watched it practically crawl down that same tree. It was actually pretty unsettling. I can only describe it as human, trying to walk on all fours or trying to climb a tree like a cat. The limbs were all just as long as I had seen them too. The head, though, it looked horrendous. It was round like a human's, but it looked too big for the body, and it also had what appeared to be two small horns. Something told me that something wasn't right here, but I had to keep watching. As it finally got to the ground, I saw it lower its head and pretty much just tear apart whatever it got from that tree. It was horrible, and I was actually pretty freaked out. I thought this was a deer at first, but I didn't think that deers could climb trees, and I also didn't know that they were carnivorous. I stopped watching as I sat on the floor of the van, thinking about what I saw and what to do. Do I wake someone up? Do I still try to draw it? Or should I just keep watching it? Of course, I decided to look for it again. And when I looked back up, I noticed the thing had stopped moving again. So I did the same and I just stared and watched. That's when I think it got tired of me watching it too. I noticed that it turned in my direction instead of at a side and appeared to be looking right towards me. I couldn't see its eyes, but I could tell. You get that feeling when you're being watched, and it was an awful feeling. I decided to go back in my seat, to cover my head up with a sweater that I was wearing, and try to fall back to sleep now. Unfortunately, the watching feeling was not going away. I uncovered my head, and I looked back out the window to see that this thing had gotten closer. I quickly covered my head back up, grabbed my MP3 player, and I tried to drown out my thoughts and silly fears. I was just a kid, so surely this was just an animal that I didn't know of, right? And after a while, I had finally fallen asleep. I woke up again due to my dad snoring and my music ending. And when I awoke, because of the way my head was facing, I could see out the front where it was still dark. And when I pulled my sweater down all the way, to my horror, I saw a face on the other side of my window, with their hands cupped around it. I could clearly see human eyes, but there was no nose, not even a slit where the nose could be. This, of course, made me scream and jump out of my seat, waking everyone else up. My stepmom, being startled, was the first to ask what happened. When I looked back at the window, there was nothing there. I didn't want to scare my siblings, so I just told them that a bird hit the window and scared me. My dad then went and walked around the car and didn't see anything, but since we were all awake, we just decided to go ahead and leave. Apparently, we had stopped at some kind of rest stop. The building we were parked by was a restroom, but there was not a single other vehicle around us. I didn't get out to use the restroom as I was too scared, and I decided to hold it until we stopped somewhere for breakfast. I still haven't told anyone other than a good friend of mine because I feel like I was just seeing things. And I didn't know if anyone would believe me. One thing that I do know that was real though was the drawing that I did that night that I recently found. Trees, darkness, and a deer-like creature with no head. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared, because your fear feeds me.